Hello everybody, welcome to another video of a game that I've played. This one's a bit different than my usual league games because I was playing in a big tournament on this Lichess site. It was a 10-minute plus 0-second increment rapid play arena, and it's not really that big a tournament. However, there were a lot of sort of 2300s, 2400s playing this time round, and I got the chance to play Rosen, who is a fairly well-known chess streamer, and I was white, and this was the last round of the tournament. Well, essentially last round. There are only about I think about 15 minutes left in the arena, so essentially, unless the game was over really fast, it would be the final game for each of us. And I played c4 with my opponent playing e6, then knight c3 and d5, so he's essentially challenging my English opening by fighting me on the light squares. I can play d4 going into a queen's gambit, declined, but instead I chose to take. E takes, and here the main move is d4, so it's almost like a reversed I guess it can be a bit like a reversed Caracal, I suppose. But d4 is a fairly solid move, and then you can simply play like knight f3 and bishop f4 and such. But instead I chose a rather unusual move, e3. I'm attempting to make black occupy the centre with c5, and then I can play d4. But after knight f6, I realised there isn't much I can do except to go back into the usual positions. So with knight f3 and bishop d6, I played d4. So this gives black a fairly pleasant position. They've almost got I guess a kind of London system in a way, but it looks like they've got no real problems, and I don't have a great deal to write home about. The only thing I might have is that there's possibilities of exploiting the weak b7 pawn with queen b3, but I didn't like playing that straight away because I just don't feel like I have enough. It's possible I'm mistaken, that I can simply run after the pawn, but moving my queen out so early in the game can often lead to disasters. So I played a bit more sort of passively, I guess you could say, with bishop d3, responding to his bishop f5. Then bishop g6, very solid move. If I take, then they'll take with the h-pawn, activating the rook, swinging down the board to end up mating me if I'm not careful, and if I castle on the king side. I played a rather unusual move, improving a piece, with knight to e5. And what this does is, if black takes on e5, I take with the pawn, I've got the bishop pair, where I don't think I'll keep it too long because he could always trade on d3, but I gain space, I force the knight to move, and I have a little initiative here. I think my opponent plays an interesting move, which is to undermine the d4 pawn, because if this pawn goes, then the knight will be able to get taken and be dislodged from its square. That's why c5 was played. And I missed the best move here in the computer analysis after the game. It turns out bishop check on b5 is correct because the two squares where black can block checks are attacked by my knight. Therefore, what black would be going into a pin and would also have some pressure being put on them, which would at least give white equality. But instead, I chose the move f4. Anchoring my knight in the middle of the board, and also possibly trying to play f5 in the next move to trap their bishop, or very nearly trap it. He doesn't want that to happen, so he trades, and I take with the queen, castles, and queen b5 is a interesting move, but again I feel like black can probably lose the b-pawn, but get a lot of play for it. And I don't like to be the one under pressure. I castle, knight c6 to develop. Both sides are fairly happy with their positions. I think black may still be a touch better because of my c1 bishop being very awkward. So what I do, a bit like in the Dutch, which is essentially this is, where I'm playing as white, I maneuver it round. I guess you could also be like a French, by the way. But yeah, anyway, I maneuver the bishop round and try and take this knight on on f6. So Eric Rosen decides to go on the queen side, rook c8, and he has the immediate plan, I think, of rook c8, queen b6, pressuring the c file and the d4 pawn. And long term, I think he's going to possibly put pressure on the b2 pawn with his queen b6 plan, maybe taking it. There is also the idea of the f rook going to e8 on the open file, or doubling on the c file, and his f6 knight could come into either d7 to dislodge my knight, or e4 gaining space. I continue with my sort of straightforward plan of going to trade this awful bishop, and I probably could have played bishop f2 just to guard d4, but again it's so passive that it doesn't feel right. I play aggressively, and I've got, I guess I've kind of got designs on the king side, going for the king. Obviously plans can change if the position changes. I'm also aiming at d5, because if I take the knight, d5 is not defended, so I can then take it with my knight. It's a purely kind of tactical move, bishop h4. And black takes on d4, going straight for the tactics. And I think I have to respond with a counter punch. I can't really play like e takes d, because this will give him all the initiative. So I take the knight, and if black takes on f6, I have a couple of moves that look interesting, knight d5 being one of them. So for example, if takes, knight takes d5, and then if black plays a move like queen b2, then knight takes f6 check. This looks unbelievably dangerous for my opponent. Again, it's possible that he's surviving this, but I would definitely not want to play as black. There's all sorts of tactics here, like queen takes h7 is a plan. And I may even be able to lose the knight and win the game through some sort of mating attack. If I don't, I always have moves like knight to d7, which will defend my knight and threaten mate. If black defends it, I have things like queen f5, for example, and then mating here. So black is certainly under a lot of pressure in this position. In the game, he did not play pawn takes bishop because of the weak king that he would be exposing to the elements. He took on c3, taking my other piece. And here, can you see the move I played as white to continue my attack and my pressure on his position? What I played was not the most obvious move, which is either taking the pawn on c3 or trading knights, or even getting my bishop out of the way. I played knight d7, forking the queen and the rook. There's loads of tactics here. To be honest, I was not calculating this as well as I maybe should have done, because I still had 8 minutes on my clock. But this felt right. It looked correct to force black into this very difficult position to play. There's all sorts of things that can happen here. For example, knight to b4. I can take the queen. He'll take my queen. And then I can grab the rook. And despite the fact I've got two pieces hanging, I don't think this is so bad, because my bishop isn't really hanging because I take his bishop. And if he takes my knight, which is probably best, my bishop can capture on c3. And I'm just the exchange up. I don't think he has any counterplay. So that line doesn't really work. Queen takes b2. I was looking at two different moves. I'm not sure if they're that different, but the main move I was looking at was knight takes. Because if they take my bishop, then I can take on h7 with advantage. But if they take on f6, if they take on f6, I take on h7. If they take on f8, which looks better, then I can play bishop takes c3, removing any chance they have of counterplay. and then simply getting my queen out the pin. And again, this isn't quite as straightforward as the previous positions, but I am still the exchange up in exchange for a pawn. This looks like the kind of position, though, where the rooks should overpower the black minor pieces. So that's option number 2. What was option 3? Pawn takes bishop would lose because the queen drops. He played queen c7 in the game. There is queen a6 as an alternative move. And I think I would maybe trade the queens here. He would take. And then I think I can get away with taking the rook. Because even though my bishop is hanging, my knight does have an escape route with knight to d7. And then bishop e7. I had thought I had rook d1, then playing the sort of somewhat simple rook takes d5. But it is possible that I've missed something here, because my knight does look very awkward in this position. I'm going to cheat for a second and see what it says. Okay, it likes white after rook ac1. Not that easy a move to see, to be honest. I think the reason must be that when black takes on b2, I have c5 covered with my c1 rook. Okay, so maybe I've messed it up somewhere. But maybe this was the best plan. So queen a6 is an interesting move. Oh, but queen f5. Very nice. Queen f5, even stronger. So what this move does... queen hits d5 also would be good. Yeah, queen f5, excellent move. Because they can't take the knight. The rook is still hanging. If they move the rook somewhere, my bishop can take on c3. So then I've, got no problems, and I've got the initiative. Big attack. And if they do take the bishop, then there's knight takes f6, and I believe this should mate them. If they play king h8, I mate on h7 straight away. But if they go to g7, I can't take on h7 because my knight will drop. Can you see the way I can maneuver my way into a mate? I have the very nice technique, queen g5, forcing the king to h8, and then queen h6. And I don't believe there is a way for black to prevent mate in the next, say, few moves. The only way I can see is queen d3. If you saw that, well done. But then I have f5, which will confound them. There's no way of preventing mates other than just giving a bunch of checks for a few moves, and then I'll get out of all the checks and win. So in the game, after knight d7, he played queen c7, which is, I think, a good move. And I continued, knight takes f8. And here, if king or bishop takes knight, again, bishop takes c3, and I've got no problems. He took. I continued, knight takes h7. I don't want to drop my knight yet, so I keep the knight on the board. If it does end up getting trapped, it will be annoying for black to maneuver all the way around the board to take it. So it will take a few moves, and I have a very key tactical plan of playing rook f3 and then either rook g3 or h3, depending on the exact position on the board. And also the c3 pawn can get taken as well fairly soon. So he took on b2, and even though I can play rook b1 or rook d1, etc., and keep the advantage, I felt that here I had a good way to maneuver my knight into a better place with knight takes f6 check. If the king moves somewhere that isn't g7, then I will, at the very least, I can move the rook, and I've got a brilliant knight. So king f8, I would probably move the rook to b1. Instead, king g7 is played, and I don't want to lose the knight unnecessarily. I play knight h5 check, king h6, and now I do intend to lose the knight with rook a b1. Can you see my plan after king takes h5? What am I going to do here? Mate in 2. Queen h7 is the key thing to see, forcing the king up the board. And even if you couldn't see the mate here, this just looks so unpleasant for black that you feel there must be a mate. And I believe the best one is queen h3 checkmate, but there must be loads of others that are on the board. He did not take my knight. He played knight b4. And I think he's a bit desperate here, trying to, sort of counterattack in any way possible. And yeah, if I'm not too careful, maybe queen c1 can get played, with plans of sacking the queen temporarily and then taking back on c1, making a new queen, and etc, etc. And if I'm not too careful, I may lose my knight, or take away all chances of me having a big attack. But I think I played the best move, queen f5, which defends my knight. I don't really have that much attachment to it, but it's mostly about bringing my queen closer to the board. Not to the board, closer to the king on the board. And if he were to play some move like queen c2, trying to trade the queens, what would I respond with? Well, there may be several ways of doing this, but I thought the best way was queen to g5, king moving, and then queen g7 checkmate. So my knight ends up being the key player here in helping the queen. Instead, he tried the only other move, which was rook g8, preventing that plan. So here I thought I found a very nice move, knight to f6. And I think this is winning on the spot, because Eric Rosen doesn't have a lot of ways of stopping queen to h7 checkmate. If he plays rook h8, I mate on g5 instead. He's unlikely to do that. And rook g7 allows queen h5 mate, so rook g6 is the only move left which prevents that plan. But can you see what I was going to do here to put my victory beyond any doubt? I was going to play queen h5, king is forced to g7 to get out of check, then knight e8. And it's forking the queen and the king. I will win the queen and win the game. So he would most likely resign in that position. Instead, he tried a completely desperate move, rook takes g2. I took it because why not? May as well take the piece and avoid any complications. And then queen c2, where as long as you don't blunder, you will win the game. I saw that my queen was being attacked, so I took with the queen. And he resigned. I think this is the right time to resign. Because when he takes, I will actually give back the exchange with rook takes pawn, getting rid of any chance of me messing it up. King f2, he may try a trick, but then simply sidestep with the king, lose the exchange. I'm perfectly happy losing it, because I'm now rook up, and only for a pawn, so this is a very, very simple win. And I think I can say with great confidence that I would win this game. So it was a very nice match, I think. Lots and lots of tactics. Too many, in fact. I could not entirely satisfactorily calculate them. But I felt like I had to go for a very tactical position and dynamic in a game where you don't quite have enough time to fully calculate it all out, and you have to go off intuition. And in these kinds of positions, the side with the attack has a much easier time finding good moves. A nice win, and hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time. Bye.